Hello, and welcome to another edition of Sun Dragon Tips and Tricks. I'm Rebecca. I'm the owner of Sun Dragon Art and Fiber in downtown Brevard, North Carolina. And I'm filming not on a Monday. This is a Saturday. This is right before our afternoon sit and stitch. I might be publishing this on a Sunday because Monday I'm not sure if I'll be somewhere where I have Wi-Fi. So, kind of doing this preemptive because I took a break last week. I didn't want to take a break for another week because some of y'all might want to see a video. I don't know. I was going to do one on gauge, and I still will, but I somehow have managed to not bring home one single Susan Bates knit check from the shop or from my personal collection. They're all at the shop. And they're my favorite for checking gauge and showing you how to do gauge. So instead, another request was how to lock floats on stranded color work without twisting your yarns around each other because they get all tangled. This is a technique that works really well if you're holding one color in each hand. And there's different ways to do it if you're locking what's in your left hand versus what's in your right hand. We'll talk about these floats and locks if you're like, what is she talking about? Hopefully we'll answer your questions in the video. And if not, feel free to leave me a comment and say, this part is still confusing, or I didn't know what you were talking about when you said "ha," because honestly, we can make assumptions and we can think people know what we're talking about, and they don't, and that's okay. Especially if you're new to the game and wanting to learn more. That's why these videos are here. So it's too much to go over both hands, different ways to lock. We're going to start with just one. We're going to do what oftentimes if there's like a lot of one color and then another color is punctuating it a little bit with the stranded color work, it's often done holding that punctuating, that contrast color in your left hand. So that's the one we're going to talk about today. That's the one I've been using the most lately. If I have a lot of knitting, the main color is held in my right hand and the contrast in my left. Some say that makes it pop more. I don't know, but I like doing that because I mostly knit English style with my right hand. So we're going to go over the voodoo magic joke about how to do that. So let's get to it. So here's the extremely long title I've given this week. So it's a knitting video, locking the floats, two-hand stranded color work without twisting, part 1. And by two-hand, I mean you're holding the yarn in two different hands. You're using both of your hands. And this video is specifically on locking the left hand yarn down in place. Okay. So a few things about locking what we call the float. So I should explain. When say you knit one stitch with color B, and then there's 6 or 7 stitches with color A before color B comes in again, the yarn floats behind those stitches. There's a long strand of it, and it's often called a float. So a float is a long strand of yarn between stitches. And if the float is too long, it can get snagged, it can pull. Often it helps to lock it down, to twist it, or find some way to pin it to the work. And it's really personal preference when to do that, when to lock it down, tag it to the back of the work. For me, I wouldn't let it go. I say this, and I've done it, but I try not to let it go more than, say, 6 stitches, somewhere between 4 to 6 stitches. So if there's like 9 stitches between one stitch of color B and the next one, there's 9 stitches of A in between, I might want to lock it down around stitch 5. Every 4 to 6 stitches. It's not advised to lock it every single stitch because it can be visible from the front, and you want to minimize that. The more you lock it down, the more chances there are it could be visible. I believe if I don't have it in another video about locking things down, we can address it maybe in our next one. Another thing that's not on this sheet here is you don't want to lock it down in the same place on 2 stacking rows if possible, because it'll be more visible. They'll pop out a little bit more. But let's just talk about what this specific video addresses. So here are the steps for locking the left hand yarn. You're knitting along with the right, and the left hand yarn is just stranding across, and we need to make sure it is stuck on the back. I'll talk you through it here, but not everyone, the words will sink in. So we'll look at some pictures of it, and then we'll do it. And whichever one works for you. If it works to watch all three, go for it. If it works to look at the pictures, great. If seeing it in action is really the only way it's going to sink in, zip forward to that part of the video. There, I would say of what I wrote down, 1, 3, and 5 are going to feel like you're actually just doing a normal stitch. But there's other stuff in between to lock it down. So inserting the right hand needle as if to knit under a loop on the left hand needle. Let me just clarify there, into a left hand loop. Now here's the fun part. You're going to wrap the left hand yarn that is not the yarn you're stitching with clockwise over the needle. It's the opposite of the motion you would normally wrap your yarn to do a stitch. It comes over the top. Then you go back to doing your regular stitch. Step 3 returns to what you would normally do for a stitch. Kind of forget about what's in your left hand for a minute or what it just did. The right hand yarn is going to come under and around the needle in a counterclockwise motion. It's the usual knitting motion. It's the correct way that you would knit with your right hand yarn. That is supposed to be, it's the color that's supposed to be doing that stitch. Then another added step in here, you're going to unwrap the left hand yarn back over the top of the needle. You're reversing the motion. Keep forgetting to end my parentheses. You're reversing the motion of number 2. Number 2 came over, number 4 comes off. You're backing out the step you did in 2. Then for step 5, really the end of it, you're doing that pull through of the right hand yarn to the front. It's a regular knitting motion, and slide the loop off the left hand needle. So if we looked at these steps, 1, 3, and 5 is a normal knitting stitch. You go in, you wrap the yarn, you pull it back through, take it off. I've kind of combined the last 2 steps of a regular knit stitch into 5. So step 1 is you go in. We jump to step 3, you wrap your yarn that's in your right hand. Step 5, you duck it back under to the front. These added steps add in the lock. So you go in, this yarn comes over, wrap this yarn around like a normal stitch. This yarn comes off and duck it back to the front. Let's take a look at pictures. So my fingers probably are not doing it justice. Let's take a look at pictures. And then let's do it with real yarn. So you know me, I like to color code things. This is step 1 from what we just talked about. I've just stuck my right hand needle in for a regular knit stitch. Let's make all of these stitches that are hanging on the needle, let's make them all orange just to keep them straight from everything else that is about to happen with our yarn. So the stitches that are hanging out on the needle are orange. Our contrast color, this guy over here, let's make him green. Our left hand yarn. And the right hand yarn over here, kind of close to orange, but not. We're gonna make him pink, so we can keep track of what's going on. Now, step 2, what needs to happen next is our contrast yarn that we need to lock down needs to come up and over. This yarn here needs to come up and over the right hand needle. It is a clockwise. If you were looking down the barrel of the needle, it would look clockwise. Once you do that, it's going to look like number 2 here. When it comes up and over, that green yarn is now over on top of the needle. In all of these steps until the very end, these needles don't move. You go in, all this stuff happens before you pull out. So you'll notice that these needles, they're not going to change. Oh, I forgot to draw in our other yarn here. Silly me, so much going on. But at the end of step 2, this yarn's still just hanging out here. Let's identify these stitches down here still that are just hanging out on the needle. The next step is what should normally happen to this pink yarn. It should come around this way for a regular knit stitch. So that's the normal way it would come around that needle if we were just doing a regular knit stitch. When you finish that, so we did 1, then we went to step 2, now we're going to step 3. Once you finish that step, here's what it'll look like. It'll look like a hot mess, but it's not. Trust me. We still have our green yarn hanging out here. Behind it, really, that pink yarn has wrapped up and over, and everything else is still just hanging out where it was. On each step, I'm kind of writing in what happens next. Now that we have it in this spot, what needs to happen next is we need to unwrap that green yarn. So this guy needs to see if he, let me move it down a little bit. If he came over this way, he needs to come back off the reverse direction. So he needs to get flipped off over the needle, reversing the action of what you did up top. Once you do that, here's what it'll look like. If you let the tension be super loose on it, you would see it just kind of hunkering over your right hand strand, just hanging out back there behind all the needles. Now the next thing that has to happen while it's hanging out back there is finish your stitch. You're gonna need to pull this needle. He gets ducked back through and out to the front. Remember, that's the one that's a regular knitting motion. And if there's too much going on in these pictures, watch me do it with real yarn in a second. Whoop. Here's what it'll look like when you do that. Believe it or not, because that guy back there, we're moving over this way, leaving him, the green one, hanging off the back, when you duck your right hand yarn forward, we'll stop seeing it. It'll start to be kind of hidden back there. So here's the yarn that's still being held by my left hand. The pull through is pulling what's in my right hand to the front, but you'll still see the yarn you're holding in the back. And it's pulling it through that orange stitch. Now, this orange loop that we have been working this whole time needs to get taken off the left-hand needle. Believe it or not, this is what it will look like in the end. Here's that orange loop. Here's the pink loop that we have just added with the yarn that is in our right hand. And if you look really, really carefully, you might see the left-hand yarn ever so slightly visible back behind the stitch. It is locked into the back of the work, but these two strands have not become twisted in the process. So let's see what this looks like with real yarn. So here's a little sample that I've started with some different colors and some different stitches to kind of lock things in place and keep it from curling up too much on us here. But for the sake of the drawings we did, I'm going to put my teal in my left hand because that's kind of like the contrast color in the pictures. And then I don't have pink, but I do have cream. Okay, so I've already done a stitch of each color. And I'm going to do 5 stitches of the cream before I do a teal again. It's going to come over here. And I'm going to lock it down on the 3rd stitch. Now I know in the other segment I said every 4 to 6 stitches, but this is for the sake of not having a very long sample for y'all. So I'm going to go in and do 1, 2. Be nice if I could get my normal stitches right. And on this third one, let's lock it. So we're going to go in. My contrast in my left hand is going to come over clockwise over the top. See it there? My regular yarn is going to do what it regularly should do. The yarn is actually knitting the stitch. It's going to come around from underneath, around and between, I like to call it. Then I'm going to take this guy off again. So he's just hanging out back there. And then I'm going to duck my yarn under to the front, the yarn that's in my right hand. He's back there. He's not part of the stitch though. And then I'm going to slide him off. Now, if we take a look, just like in the picture, if we look under here, if we look on the back, let's do that. This might look like it's not connected. If I knit another stitch with my cream, and we look back here, the teal is locked down. If I really poke and prod, it's under there. It's right about here. It gets lost with a teal stitch that's underneath it. Actually, that can be very helpful sometimes if you want it not to be as noticeable. But there's the lock right there. So I've done 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me do one more with my cream. And now it's time to knit with my teal. So things are spaced out. On the back, if I pull this up, this is a float from the row before. That's pretty long, but this right here is locked down. It comes in, it gets locked, and it goes out again. So let's try that another time. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to have 1. Get some slack. 1, 2. On this third stitch, I'm going to go into knit. I'm going to bring my contrast yarn over the top, the opposite direction of a knit stitch. I'm going to regularly knit with the color that it's supposed to be done in. I'm going to take that contrast color back off over the back, and I'm going to finish my stitch. So the stitch is in my color A. My color B has been locked down behind here, and I can keep going. And then this one's going to be my teal. One more time, let's do it in terms of a normal stitch, the extra step, normal, extra. Let's go back and forth. So 1, 2. Now, start a regular stitch, add in throwing the contrast over in the opposite direction, continue with my regular stitch, undo what I just did with my contrast, reverse my motion, continue with my regular stitch, and I'm done. When it goes fast, it's kind of a whoop, 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 whoop. But again, even though I don't need to lock it down, let's do it one more time. So I go in to do a stitch. I take what I want to lock over the top. I continue with what would be a regular stitch. I undo that over the top, and I continue with my regular stitch. So I have a bunch of locks in here. If I turn this over, rather than having a long float like this, the row up here, where I only have the teal every 5 stitches or so, I don't have long floats because I have locked them down. Now this will not work. It works a slightly different way if you are knitting a bunch of stitches with your left hand and you need to lock down what's in your right. We will try to do a video on that one soon. So thanks for joining us for the adventures in starting to learn how to lock down your floats without twisting. The sample I just showed you These yarns are not twisted around each other at all. I just finished that row, and these guys, I didn't have to untwist the different skeins, the different balls of yarn at all. So if we can next week, maybe we'll try to show you the other way of locking it down. To be quite honest, I haven't done that one in a while because I've been working on things where I only need to lock down what is in my left hand. I'll refresh myself on that and be ready to show you it really soon. Let me know if you liked the video, drop some comments, subscribe if you haven't. I love that our channel is growing. Let me know what you would like to see. I hope to do more of the heartfelt lessons from knitting to share with y'all, and crochet. I hope to get back to some crochet videos. If there's a crochet technique you would like to see, I've done a lot of crochet videos and I am pondering what to do next. What have I missed? Tell me. And as always, may your crafting be filled with joy and confidence. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye. Why, hello, kitty. Yeah? I see. What a day.